please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and we'll solve the border issues at countries A through Z and way better at the same time. I just remind Black Black pupils, America. See, I believe it's the Navajo who say we must read each other's dreams and see president slash chief. Every identity of individual and the difference between the individual as a leader of a location, area, state, and then further a country, because location, areas, and states, and that phenomena is manifest for how nature is communicates with the species volume, being distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, but further hyper simultaneously itself, its identity relationship to itself, and the value of that, which appreciates a special difference as yourself, as Earth, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously as itself, and hyper simultaneously as itself. But we can be further positive or negative. We could be systems, tactical, ulterior, individual groups, and together we could all self-value being systems, tactical, ulterior, with use/s of positive treatments, syntactically, and or negative treatments. And both of those are simultaneously identity treatments, time treatments. See, the interbranch has roles with back and forth logic that we discern in theater, with television, with the arts, juxtaposed, speaking about each age of correlation nature. This movie is about kids on a campus, on and off the campus. This movie is about kids on and off, and sometimes off the campus. This movie is about, how come we don't have movies about people in elderly homes? Because they can't take the truth/hyper truth. How come we don't have people in elderly homes and veteran buildings? These buildings were designed by that breaching method before our founders were born to counter extort within more than 13 colonies, 13 positions within and names within those colonies, and give them the only way out because of the torture, extortion, slavery method already entrenched, and with means to it only increasing at all locations, areas, and states, everywhere the species body was already since semi-ancient times. Native Americans, as 1/3 of our founders, they were doing damage control to this. 1/3 of our founders, another third of our founders was a portion that was forced to be, which was everyone except for Madison and George Washington. We have not addressed his counter extortion. I forgot to mention. I'll put that in another video. But so in other words, Judge Napoliltano has a YouTube channel named Judging Freedom, and he has good sources, and they're trying to bring demonstrate, I don't know, consciously, probably obviously consciously trying to bring better attention and care to serious things that we have ignored, that are tied to serious things, to keep us from ignoring serious things at countries A through Z too. There's a shock and awe that Donald Rumsfeld, reportedly by CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, recorded involved with the World Trade Center attack and with our side's counters to it, who also have stayed collusion/S with the criminally foreign influence/hyper criminally foreign influenced use/S of the World Trade Center and the names next to it. This is what forgiveness is about too. Because not to give up, but or the difference, but to be led by the hyper invisible, but still discernible, to be led by those acts, and the ones to hide them sins, and the fake motivations planting, which can be discerned relative to the needs to discern New York City. This breaching method showed modern legal identities how to that it self value collusion slash S with predicate acts with facts, black pupils. See the whites of eyes. They failed to 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 defend a quality of fact human nature capable of affording to be the nature of short words with any person at each age of correlation nature where we are actually capable of being by then. There are revelations that come from discerning what we are capable of discerning where and how we didn't want against the Native Americans and against the colonists that sickly distinctly against them, against the Native Americans, and against ourselves as Americans. And this is with modern countries A through Z. Modern religions, one thing science shows they are about, that's positive, is that they're about how the sciences became criminally foreign influenced and pretending others simultaneously as roles with a torture, extortion, slavery method. Three ways manifest are tough fast vaccines and relative rare sequence, shifting styles in nature. See, a whole bunch of jobs are told to hide their uses of location slash S roles. And they don't understand that to an extent because the breaching method understood it before them. Even though the people we can make the UN game, for example. I'm trying to show how to make hyper positives out of negatives. The UN right now is only capable of making criminal insidiousness natures of positives as collusions out of negatives. For example, as a grouping of humanity, tactically ulterior, as they have been, all voice groupings, and let alone where how they are self-valued, because there's remote uses of that, which is relative where and how there is a hyper extraterritorial. Not just there are not just extraterritorial roles with the motivations. For example, of people named Scalora and Demoro and Cololo, with ones on off the World Trade Center and on off the Ninth Circuit Court next to the World Trade Center in Manhattan, leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that context and since, and where and how they communicate through others, and the difference between what is communicated and said. They have roles with being used and having been used remotely, investigators in their campuses, in the agencies. One of the shell games things they do, they have shell games and exceptions with it, where they have the political parties and their differences relative to their roles with these names, also with the border issues. They have roles with the border and interstates. These are people involved with Mexico against Mexicans, but in their name. Americans against Americans, but in their name. And with the where there are apparent motivations like tied to DACA and the market's positions associated with that. That location is also involved with investigations, investigate all kinds of natures of trade agreements, like with psychiatry drugs, like with all kinds of other natures of interests and uses of the elements of the earth. Like, for example, where that is manifest in the debate and in the nature of debate with people. See this preaching method from semi-ancient times, the proverbial devil, the proverbial shaitan, and exceptions. See, because now it became named after, but after it had been sustained, it had been discerned. a transnational organized crime method had become manifest. As with collusions, also where it's using difference, it was collusions with people that speak for the law formally, as the interbranch and the intelligence tied to them, and where and how humanity is shared simultaneously as a species volume bound in A through Z, and as an individual, bound individual, and with group difference, ages, areas, sexes, locations, states. See, everything like that is being and has been used to communicate other than nature and actually communicate. Indoor is actually capable of communicating and being, nature uses discernment of the difference between criminal insidiousness, nature, or positive, or positive that's not criminally foreign influenced or tactically delusions raw. And it also has the value of prayer attached per science. Per the science, pantheism was more probably and demonstrably about, for example, yin yang has no conjunction between it because it is functional. How there are three distinct identities of hyper invisible but still discernible. And one of them is by being completely invisible, but per how it is tied to the other two, hyper invisible but still discernible. For example, the identity of as what really came first and or its value and relativity, no. Before the smallest finite detail of the republic for which we stand now, black pupils, for example. This breaching method uses to measure and maintain functionally where and how left out and replaced are things our founders communicated to us to communicate that we have replaced, and how they get away with it is simultaneously valued, and how they self-value that and not being used remotely by worse is part of what forgiveness is about. Correlation by criminal foreign influences, by a transnational, hyper invisible but still discernible criminal enterprise. This is even more so than that. This juxtaposed before our founders were born, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and the interbranch, and the difference between that and the intelligence tied to them, and the natures of industries A through Z, blaming other things, others, or selves for negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures increasingly that are in demonstration of the breaching method itself, which comes with demonstration of uses remotely of roles with a self-valued negative value nature progression, acts and natures increasingly only capable of being and formally directed to being through our own as humanity and or as locations, areas, and states names, and or as countries, any country, even if they don't use that formally, locations, areas, and states. We are the state of humanity, but we are now being and having been used as a volume slash volumes science slash sciences, use tactical terror from the one that generated them. Science shows us is more probable, practical, and it is increasingly demonstrable that every physical identity had/has, the part of their identity that is greater than, to where and to how we are actively group values, but also like an active state. We have an inherent state. For example, before we finish the sentence, we have to understand what we're going to say. We have to understand our subject/s. We don't have, or the relativity. Well, we need to speak about it. See, for black pupils, this preaching method knew that our own were going to lie about what they thought, what they perceived us to communicate, and or they were going to just attach everyone to fake words. And that would be manifest with nature's demonstrations of that too. And this preaching method used that as a science before our founders were born, while they had roles with its science used for this, while it was using it for all those hyper additional motivations, nature's needs and interests. True. But to screen and to keep blamed on other things other than ourselves. What's juxtaposed with it. And it is also the past. The value of nature demonstrating that past. There were conscious uses of how they forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded names A through Z so overtly / simultaneously, insidiously, criminally insidiously, to blame other things other than themselves for things the breaching method caused, like slavery. How they get away with this? For formal identities of the law. And all the collusions. In other words, excuse me, thank you. Mother